whistleblowers, and that protection goes beyond what companies can do, but it involves legislation. It involves ensuring even that our law enforcement agencies are able to act, especially when there is criminality that's been reported and there's a level of protection on those that have exposed the rot. Have you ever blown the whistle in your workplace? I'd like to hear from you on 011 883 0702. What happened afterwards? Huh? After you blew that whistle, the WhatsApp line is 0727021702. Were you targeted? Were you protected? And knowing your workplace right now, would you consider blowing the whistle? Kulani Shiluvane is a human resources specialist who's going to guide us through this conversation. Kulani, thank you for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Good morning to your listeners, and thank you for having me.
So when we talk about whistleblowing, what exactly are we talking about? Because sometimes we confuse it with just what people would ordinarily do in the workplace, just simply reporting a workplace issue or a grievance. So what's the difference?
Okay, so whistleblowing involves reporting a serious wrongdoing that affects public interest. These are things such as fraud, corruption, health and safety violations, right? And it goes, as you've mentioned, goes beyond a personal grievance, right? Whereas a personal grievance involves, how somebody is treated in the workplace. Whistleblowing focuses on misconduct that can harm others in the company or society at large.
Okay, and from your experience, how do companies deal with whistleblowing? Often when we talk about this, there are some listeners that are even scared to blow the whistle in their workplaces because they just don't trust that they will be protected. So is there enough protection? And from your experience, have companies created an environment that is conducive for people to really expose if there's something untoward happening?
In my experience, yes and no. I think a lot of organizations are doing the best that they can. Organizations have things like policies in place that can guide employees on, the steps that they need to take in terms of how to blow the whistle, so to speak. However, some companies are still, lagging behind. There are no clear guidelines on how to go about it. There are no policies in place. There aren't even structures or mechanisms within the workplace where people can actually, without fear or favor, actually blow the whistle, right? It needs mechanisms like, how does one actually go about reporting any kind of issue that is happening? Is there an anonymous hotline? What internal processes are in place for people to do so? So we find a mix within organizations, but in the whole, I do think that organizations, number one, are doing the best that they can. They also have legislation on what that can guide them. We have in South Africa the Protected Disclosure Act. And, organizations should use that as a guideline when they're drafting policies in order to ensure that, they're creating a conducive environment within their organizations for people to blow the whistle conducively.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great for us to have legislation, obviously. It's great for companies to say, oh, there's this hotline you can call and be anonymous. But I mean, Kulani, that if I'm going to blow a whistle about a specific issue, it's going to be very simple for people who know the intimate details of my department and maybe the project that I've been running and maybe the concerns that I've raised in the company about the project. And people who know that are likely to be led towards me whenever they are trying to figure out who may have blown the whistle. So I wonder, how do we get people to be comfortable to blow the whistle? Because legislation on its own is just not enough. Like we've seen people being unfairly treated where there is constructive dismissal, even though there's legislation out there that could protect them. But because in the company you may be seen as, why did you, go and put the dirty laundry of this company in public like that? Some companies often want to come after you. So I suppose what I'm trying to figure out is, on top of the legislation, which is crucial to have, what else do we need to do within the companies to protect employees? Because at some point, they will know that it is you, even though stuff is done anonymously. If you've raised issues about a particular project and the next thing there's an anonymous complaint about the very same issues you've been raising, it leads them to you, and sometimes you get unfairly treated. What options are available for such employees?
So ideally, whistleblowing should happen internally within organizations, right? However, as you mentioned, that's not always conducive, right? So, even the legislation itself recognizes the fact that sometimes the internal structures and the internal mechanisms do not suffice because there is, those intimate details, and it would be easy for people within the organization to mismanage the whistleblowing, lack of a better word. So there are ways in which individuals can actually, use external disclosures, and the legislation does make a provision for that because it does recognize that sometimes, internally it's not a conducive environment. I think internally, in addition to what I spoke about in terms of creating an environment and mechanisms that are conducive to whistleblowing, I think it's also important that we understand, the best practice around these, right? So disclosing needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be investigated independently. And most importantly, and I think this is where a lot of it actually stems from, is that the whistleblower needs to be protected by all means necessary. The individual or individuals need to be protected. And when the process, of investigation is going, the report needs to be, we need to have a transparent outcome, and without disclosing any kind of sensitive information. So, number one, internal structures might not be ideal. So there are external structures that you can utilize, but we also need to ensure that there's best practice when these matters are being handled as well.
Yeah. 011-883-0702. If you are an employer, maybe you can share with us how you go about protecting whistleblowers. But as an employee, have you ever blown the whistle on any wrongdoing? What happened afterwards? Were you protected? Were you victimized? What was the process afterwards? And if you've never done it and you're considering doing it, given what you've assessed in as far as your workplace is concerned, is this something that you would ever do? Got a message here from Anonymous who says, "Hi Clement, I'm a forensic investigator, and some organizations I have worked for do not protect their employees. They actually victimize them. It's the same as, tip off Anonymous. There is nothing anonymous about it. If they want to find you, they will. Because of that, I could never become a whistleblower. I'm protecting my life and my job." And I suppose this is a point I was making earlier, Kulani, that if the company really wants to find you, they can find a way to know who you are. But I suppose, Kulani, what you would need here is you need HR departments. In fact, you need companies to create a culture where employees feel safe to come forward without fear of victimization or retaliation. I would want to know before I even blow the whistle that, this is a company that actually takes wrongdoing seriously. Can I ask though, in a company where there could be like a board of directors, is it advisable for someone in a company who may want to blow the whistle but doesn't necessarily trust HR or the executives in the company, is there an option for them to go directly to one of the board members and say, I want to reveal this to you guys because I'm scared that I may be victimized, or that if I raise this issue with the executives in the company or HR, it may be just thrown under the carpet?
No, definitely. You can definitely go to, so-called external structures that don't necessarily sit with the day-to-day operations of the organization. And the board is a good example of that, where you can actually go and address the board directly to say, I'm concerned. I've seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't think if I reported this internally, it will be dealt with. Hence, I have brought it here. So definitely the board is a good is a good place to go. But there are also other external organizations, right? There are NGOs like Corruption Watch and Alta that can also assist individuals that exist in these organizations that unfortunately do exist, Clement, where, people are victimized, people are forced into resigning because it's not handled in the manner in which it should be handled.
Yeah. Another one says, "Hi Clement, Anonymous here. Please, I blew the whistle on my manager and I followed the reporting rules to the book. I am now being unfairly treated and receiving reprisal from my manager to a point that I feel they are conniving to go towards constructive dismissal. My faith and confidence in my role here is what's keeping me strong." That's a message there from Anonymous. So advice to this person would be maybe like approach Corruption Watch, approach other people, because you do need people like this to be protected.
100%. My advice there would be, number one, to lay a grievance internally, especially if they are pushing towards some kind of constructive dismissal, right? So deal with it internally, lay a grievance, and the organization is then forced to deal with the matter as internally as well. But do use external organizations as well. And as an HR practitioner, as I always say, you need to document everything. When things come to a push and shove, you need to ensure that you have all your ducks in a row to document everything. But step number one, do lay a grievance, see how that goes. If that is not handled in the way that it should be handled, then do approach, the necessary organizations to ensure that this is dealt with effectively.
What about the risk of employees who misuse whistleblowing channels to settle personal scores or for malicious reasons? How can HR manage that risk? Because it will happen, Kulani, even though it's under special circumstances. But there's instances where employees will misuse these whistleblowing channels, or they'll try and say something for malicious reasons. How do you then manage that as a business or even as HR, that risk?
So you need to assess what is happening, right? Human beings are very complex, Clement. So you, as an HR practitioner, you need to be able to differentiate between something that is either a personal grievance, or if somebody is, a so-called tattletale and they're trying to use, internal and proper structures to settle a personal score, or if this is a genuine issue that needs, the protection that comes with being a whistleblower as well. And the distinction is very, very important, right? Because somebody that's trying to, if we as HR practitioners start using mechanisms designed for serious things like whistleblowing to settle personal scores of individuals within the organization, we're going to lose the confidence of actual real whistleblowers. So you need to be able to distinguish between the two and handle the two in a way that is proper for both to be handled, because the distinction becomes extremely, extremely important. We do live in a society where whistleblowers are afraid to come forward because of the way they've seen other whistleblowers being handled. So if we conflate those two issues, then we're not doing justice to the whistleblowers.
Yeah, it's 21 minutes now after 11 o'clock. Here's some WhatsApp voice notes that have come through on 072 702 1702.
Hi, Clement. I would like to remain anonymous. I think on the issue of whistleblowing, Clement, it's a good thing to stand against crime and corruption. But in a country where whistleblowers are not protected and they are being victimized, all that, it is not worth it. And personally, I would actually not do that. Thank you.
Good day. I worked for a company that had a manager suspended, and when the manager wanted to get staff members in to stand at the hearing for him, the staff members were told that you will cut your career short with the company, therefore they didn't stand for them.
Morning, Clement. The only solution is to have the hotline where you're going to be anonymous. But now the problem with the people who are anonymous, they don't tell us how are we going to get the evidence. You get the whistleblowing, the information, but they don't provide the evidence. So now we get stuck because they won't come forward for inquiries. You've got the information, but you don't have evidence. So we need to work around as to how we can get that evidence of a whistleblower.
Yeah, Tabo, you are in Springs. Good morning.
Morning,
Sure. Go ahead, man.
So, yeah, actually, I thank you for inviting such guests because your topic is actually similar like the one for Lebohile, whereby employees are getting victimized or they are fired unfairly because one can be a whistleblower, but maybe go through the HR. What if the HR are the ones actually defending that information that you are bringing in, and then they start victimizing you? Because I'll give an example. I was fired for whistleblowing, which was through the disciplinary hearing after I've given the information. And the HR, I was actually exposed to about 6 HR who actually eventually get me out of the job, and that led to depressions and all that.
What are you charged with, Tabo?
No, they said the thing. Then they started maybe cooking like negligence and all that. I had to go through a lot of disciplinary hearings, and I was winning those disciplinary hearings up until they get me onto a corner. But eventually, I was dismissed.
And they didn't do anything about the concerns you raised as a whistleblower?
No, they didn't. But then they were now fighting.
Yeah.
I took the matter to the DRC, I took the matter to the CCMA, but without my help. And if you will remember, I once spoke to you about such condition where a person was, I was fired because of depression.
Yeah, Tibos, that's crazy, man. Yeah, Kulani, in a case where you take the matter to HR and they just don't do anything, in fact, they find ways to victimize you and charge, trumped up charges, and they end up getting rid of you. Where do you escalate it to next? I know earlier you mentioned some other stakeholders. So if someone has sent something to HR and they're not taking it seriously, what would you advise their next step to be?
Definitely to escalate. We have the CCMA that is there to ensure and entrench the rights of both the employer and the employee. So I'll definitely escalate matters. And, Clement, it's actually quite sad that we do have situations where the organization itself, does work against employees. But definitely, I would definitely recommend that employees use external structures like the CCMA to ensure that matters like this are dealt with. Yeah.
Let's go to some messages here. Hi, Clement. I trust. I turned to be a victim at my previous work because of whistleblowing, and I reported the matter to the organization I was paying every month, but there was no help at all since then. No more doing it again. Another one says, Clement, anonymous here. Can an employee blow the whistle after disciplinary processes are taken against him for the same activity? Doesn't this look like he was colluding with management all the time and now wants to claim to be a whistleblower? Does the timing matter, Kulani? So if I'm taken through a DC for, I don't know, something I've done that's wrong in a particular project, can I then come back and say, oh, actually the CEO of the company is the one who wanted me to do this, or who was pushing for me to do this? So you're blowing the whistle after you've been sent to a disciplinary hearing.
In a case like that, the timing is not particularly. If there's let me put it this way: if there is a genuine issue that you believe is an issue that needs to be dealt with, then the timing does not matter. But we need to understand that it needs to be an issue that is serious. It's not an individual problem, but it's an individual that impacts the organization as a whole or society at large. So the timing doesn't matter. If there's a genuine concern, you should blow the whistle at any point.
Mm-hmm. And then Anonymous, I'll wrap up with this message from Anonymous who says, I witnessed some concerning behavior, reported it in good faith, but instead of getting support, I was let go over minor issues that seemed unrelated to the real problem. It's so frustrating that my concerns weren't taken seriously, especially since the person I reported apparently confessed to wrongdoing to me, and I hold the evidence to date. I will not share it with my former employer because of the way they treated me. Mind you, all the black employees knew about this, but I was the one that spoke up. Yeah, I mean, it's so sad to receive so many messages, Kulani, of people who are basically saying, I would never do this because this is how I was treated. And I think this says a lot about employers out there. It says a lot about companies out there and the environment that exists within those institutions.
100%. It is actually very disheartening to hear the amount of people that have said that I would not come forward. And I understand it, Clement. I do understand it, because you're then having to decide between, your own well-being or the greater good. And especially if you feel where you are you're singled out, right? And people know that these things are happening, but everybody's choosing, to put their head in the sand, so to speak. So it is quite disheartening. And this is where, HR and leadership within the organization actually needs to start championing and advocating for the rights and the well-being of whistleblowers. If we are going to create environments and organizations that are conducive for whistleblowing, we need to ensure that we, and I say we because I'm part of the HR and leadership as well, that organizations are conducive to do so. Otherwise, we are letting people down, and we see it a lot, and we can't continue to expect people to put themselves in harm's way if we're not going to protect them, shield them, and follow due process.
Yeah, Kulani Shiluvane, thank you for making time for us. She's a human resources specialist.
Hanging out with Clement
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.